Thursday, please. Kyle, I had too much to drink and didn't really know what I was doing. I had more than a few glasses. Maybe someone slipped something into my drink? I blacked out or was just really drunk. But when I realized what was going on, I tried to stop it. I really wanted to, but they didn't stop. There were too many of them. I think 2 of them held me while the others did things to me. I hated it all. I feel so ashamed. Susie looked at herself in the big mirror on the closet door in her bedroom. Her body wasn't as slim and toned as it was when she got married at 22. At 42, she was more rounded and softer, but still felt sexy. What happened last night proved that. She had some drinks at the club, but she wasn't really drunk. In fact, she initiated most of what happened. It's not like the male strippers at Beth's bachelorette party weren't prepared for this, but Susie was more ready. Of course, Kyle couldn't find out the truth. She knew Kyle loved her, really loved her. But she also knew what Kyle thought about cheating, especially by wives. There would be no counseling, no reconciliation. Kyle would file for divorce. Susie couldn't keep this a secret. The adventure's guilty pleasure would come out sooner or later. Kyle would notice any changes in her behavior. She couldn't tell the whole truth, but she could mix truth with fantasy. With that kind of story, she might save her marriage. As Susie refocused her thoughts, she saw movement in the mirror. Kyle was leaving. Oh no, did he hear me? How much did he hear? Overwhelmed by despair, Susie tried to gather herself. Kyle, sweetie? Is that you? There was no answer, just silence. A fear she'd never felt before started in her stomach and ran through her body, reaching her brain. In response, she nervously called out, "Kyle?" Her breathing got faster, and she felt sweat on her forehead and upper lip. Her armpits were wet, and Susie started to smell fear. Despite the urge to chase after Kyle, she resisted, worried that her guilt would be obvious. No, act normal, even if he reacts strangely. Susie slowly left the bedroom and headed to the kitchen. Her knees were weak and her legs trembled. She feared Kyle would easily notice the shaking. "Kyle? Sweetie, is that you?" she asked quietly before entering the kitchen. No sound reached her ears. She went in, but the kitchen was empty. A disappointed sigh escaped her. Where is he? In the office? Or in the precious garage with that old stuff? Susie was relieved Kyle wasn't there. She was so tense with excitement that she wasn't sure if she could lie at the moment. It's better to calm down before finding him. Deciding this, Susie started preparing dinner. Soon, bustling around the kitchen, she forgot about her nervousness. An hour later, dinner was ready, and Susie had calmed down enough to face Kyle and continue her deception. "Kyle, dinner's ready," she shouted. A couple of minutes later, she heard the front door open and close. Heavy footsteps crossed the living room floor, fading as they went down the hallway. Susie guessed Kyle had gone to wash his face, and a few minutes later, he entered the kitchen with clean hands but stains of grease and dirt on his clothes. Without a word, Kyle sat down and started eating, not even looking at her. Feeling a bit disheartened by his silence, Susie asked sarcastically, "Couldn't you have told me you were going to work on that heap of yours before leaving me alone?" His only response was a grunt as he continued eating. "Why did you come in through the front door? I thought you were in the garage." "You could have used the kitchen door." Susie persistently tried to engage Kyle in conversation. Kyle responded by chewing his food even louder than usual. Sensibly deciding to back off for now, Susie fell into a quiet mood. She knew Kyle was upset, but she wasn't sure why. Was he angry because she stayed out until dawn? Susie got home around 2 or maybe closer to 3 in the morning. She couldn't recall precisely, even though she hadn't been drinking much during the intense evening with numerous naked bodies, the aftertaste of climaxes, a long drive home, and a subsequent shower. The memory of the previous night was more like a blur of scattered images than a clear picture. The thought of the prank brought a smile to Susie's face, but she managed to contain it. A quick glance away from her food told her that Kyle was more interested in his plate than her face. Feeling at ease again, Susie wondered if Kyle had heard her earlier. She felt even more relaxed and enjoyed her dinner with a pleasure she hadn't felt in a long time. After finishing his meal, Kyle stood up, left the kitchen and went to the garage. Later, before going to bed, he took a shower and immediately fell asleep without saying a word to his wife the entire evening. Susie, tired from lack of sleep the night before, wasn't too concerned about Kyle's behavior. She felt confident in handling his worries, and tomorrow would bring a chance to resolve everything. She soon fell asleep, and a small smile graced her usually relaxed face. The bedroom was filled with the sounds of breathing, one slow and steady, the other uneven and intermittent. Friday came and Susie made another call to Beth, urging her to call back. She wasn't too worried about Beth's silence considering her upcoming wedding and the million things to do. Susie wanted to make sure Kyle wouldn't hear anything negative from them about the bachelorette party. Kyle's unusual quietness from the previous day continued into the morning, raising Susie's concern for his usually cheerful morning self. Anxiously sighing, Susie tried to focus on work, even though her concentration was lacking. "Kyle, I'm home. Where are you, honey?" Susie called out, noticing his SUV in the driveway. It was parked in the same spot as yesterday. Did Kyle not go to work today? Was he sick? Why didn't he mention it in the morning? "Kyle, where are you?" Silence was the only response. Anxiety, fueled by fear and uncertainty, rushed through her body, sending tingling sensations through her heart. Susie ran up the stairs to their empty bedroom. Susie rushed to the closet and opened the door. A relieved sigh escaped her lips when she saw all of Kyle's clothes hanging there. Not a single shirt or pants seemed to be missing, and his shoes were neatly placed on the closet floor. Susie stumbled backward, sitting on the edge of the bed. Where could Kyle be? His SUV was in the driveway, so he must be home. He never went anywhere without driving. Then a thought struck her, and a small smile appeared on her face. He's probably in the garage working on his old projects. It's Friday. He left work early, came home, and started on his project. Energized by this idea, Susie stood up and practically danced toward the garage, opening the kitchen door that led to it. She went down the step and cheerfully said, "Kyle, I'm home. How was your day?" The garage was dark. His car stood in the center, a shadowy figure, but Kyle wasn't there. Oh no, where could he be? Susie hurried through the kitchen and looked out the window into the backyard. The yard was small, making it easy to see if anyone was there, but Kyle wasn't in sight. Feeling nervous again, Susie walked around the house, searching for her husband. He was nowhere to be found. Her nervousness turned to worry and then fear. Did Kyle leave her? Would a courier show up with legal papers, maybe a divorce petition? Kyle would be home soon. He probably went out with a friend. Somewhat reassured by this thought, Susie began preparing dinner. Focusing on cooking, she managed to forget her worries for a while. After finishing dinner, Susie sat down at the table. Every bite brought anxious thoughts. Kyle had never been away for so long without telling her where he was going. Now Susie was convinced he had heard her rehearsing her excuse, which now seemed unconvincing and more ridiculous by the minute. Why did she do it? Honestly, she didn't have an answer. Kyle could be a bit much sometimes, but overall he was a good person and a good husband. He cared for her, shared funny stories, and they rarely argued. Even when they did, he never raised his voice or hand to her. Despite the seemingly idyllic marriage, there must be something missing, or else she wouldn't have done something to ruin it, right? Or maybe she had some secret desires. She fantasized about being with more than one man at the same time, maybe 2 or even 3. The idea excited her, made her weak in the knees. She never told Kyle about these fantasies because she was sure he wouldn't understand, and none of her fantasies included him. It's not like Kyle was a bad lover. He tried hard to please her in bed, always wanting to try new things. While she liked some, she rejected most. Still, Kyle made sure she climaxed, and she tested it, confirming it most of the time. She couldn't blame him for the few times she went through the motions. Those moments made her feel like her marriage and sex life were a bit outdated. Now, she wished Wednesday's party had never happened. As she questioned her actions, the guilty pleasure faded, leaving only the guilt of her infidelity. Reflecting on her life and choices, Susie concluded that nothing in her marriage could justify cheating on Kyle. Even after deciding not to cheat again, Susie still couldn't understand why she did it. It was already dark as she sat contemplating her life and waiting for her husband. She ate a little, but most of the cold food remained on her plate. She absent-mindedly noted its tastelessness. When she raised her head, her neck protested with a painful creak, sending discomfort into her shoulders. How long had she been sitting like this? A glance at the kitchen clock revealed it was a little after 9. She had been almost motionless for over 2 hours. With a tired sigh, prompted by the pain in her lower back, she stood up. Susie mechanically began cleaning up after herself. After a few minutes, she stored the food, hesitating briefly, concerned that Kyle might be hungry when he returned. Then anger surged through her, washing away her anxiety. Kyle had been out all evening without a word to her, so he could worry about his own stomach when he got home. With quick, angry movements, she finished cleaning and decided to take a bubble bath. She was tense and needed to relax. Susie began to suspect that Kyle might be playing some sort of game, paying her back for coming home late on Thursday morning. She wasn't going to play that game, and in no time she was soaking in a hot, foamy bubble bath. Around 11, Susie dried herself off and got dressed for bed. She was still sore from the events 2 nights ago, but the bath helped ease that too. Relaxed, she lay down, expecting to fall asleep. However, the absence of her snoring husband on the other side of the bed disturbed her in a strange and unexpected way. Susie thought about calling Kyle on his cell phone, but quickly dismissed the idea. She wouldn't fall for his tricks, and she certainly wouldn't give in first. Yes, she made a mistake by cheating, but it started as a fantasy. It wasn't planned. A stupid mistake that would haunt her, but she'd never admit to it. She didn't want to lose her marriage. She loved Kyle. She knew deep down that she would never make a mistake like that again. So why put it on display? It would only hurt everyone and wouldn't solve anything. The guilt she felt now was overwhelming. No, she would bear it alone, hoping and praying that Kyle would never find out. If he finds out, she refused to explore that idea further. The best thing to do was to act as if nothing had happened, the way they had throughout their marriage. And that meant not calling Kyle. Somewhat satisfied with her logic, she made herself comfortable and slowly fell into a peaceful sleep. The sound of the door closing wasn't too loud, but it made Susie wake up and instantly become alert. A dark figure moved in the bedroom. Is this really Kyle? Susie anxiously asked herself. The figure walked quietly into the bathroom, leaving the door slightly ajar. With the flick of a switch, the bathroom light illuminated a small gap with a soft yellow light. Susie listened, sure it was Kyle. Who else would do something so ordinary? But what time was it? Glancing at the glowing numbers of the alarm clock, Susie noted with irritation that it was already 2:55. Where had Kyle been all this time? He hadn't come home this late in many years. Was he really drinking, trying to drown his sorrows? Susie was about to yell at him, demanding an explanation for his late arrival, when she heard his voice. She couldn't make out what he was saying as he spoke quietly. Slowly getting up from the bed to avoid making any noise, Susie approached the bathroom door and his words reached her ears. She said she just wanted to talk. I was so angry that I didn't understand what was happening. We drank a little while talking. Then I don't know how it happened, but somehow I woke up in this motel room. I felt very drunk, and there was someone on top of me. I tried to resist, but he was still drunk or maybe drugged on something. I barely had the strength to breathe, let alone fight back. I was held down by several women and each one took turns attacking me. Sorry honey, but it's not my fault. What is Kyle talking about? He says he was raped. Lots of women, Susie asked herself with growing anger, listening to her husband from the shadow of the bedroom. How can a woman rape a man? Susie asked herself. He must be a willing participant. Filled with anger, she slammed the bathroom door open, rushed inside and came face to face with her husband. He stood naked in front of the mirror, obviously preparing to take a shower. Tilting her head towards her wife, Susie saw that Kyle was not surprised but only grinned. You're a jerk. Nobody raped you willingly. Is this the girl from your office? The secretary, Brianna? Susie screamed with pain and anger. I'm going to take a shower. We can talk when I'm done, Kyle replied calmly, intent on washing away the stench of this affair. No, I want to talk now, Susie blurted out loudly. Ignoring his wife's demand, Kyle stepped into the already running shower. Angry at his indifference, Susie briefly considered pulling him out of the shower, but that thought was too desperate. Instead, she retreated to the bedroom to wait for Kyle. A few minutes later, Kyle entered the bedroom with a towel wrapped around his pelvis and thighs. You're a jerk. How could you? How could you cheat on me? Even as she asked the question, Susie was filled with remorse, shame, and guilt. But she couldn't help herself and continued to berate him for another minute, until Kyle raised his hand to silence her. He hadn't spoken yet. Breathing heavily, Susie closed her mouth. She didn't know what Kyle would say, maybe some lame apology and justification. She just knew that if she didn't like what she heard, she would resume her verbal attack. After making sure his wife wasn't going to continue, Kyle went to the chest of drawers, pulled out a drawer, and took out his underwear. He threw off the towel and slowly began to dress in front of his wife. Seeing him naked, Susie stared at his medium-sized, deflated male organ. This innocent softness created unbidden thoughts that pierced her mind. Who else enjoyed her husband's company in an intimate way? What could they have done? She was about to say something when suddenly Kyle spoke up. You know, she called me to the office. She said she needed to talk to me. It was Beth. Whatever it was, she refused to discuss it over the phone. She insisted on a personal meeting. Naturally, I was puzzled. Yet I decided that it had something to do with the wedding. He paused to pull on his t-shirt. She also insisted that we meet here in the house. At first, I hesitated. I had a lot of work to do, but she said it was very important. So I agreed. When I returned home, she was already here and waiting. I thought we would go inside and talk. But she insisted that she wanted to go somewhere else to talk and that we should drive in the same car, hers. Stepping away from the dresser, Kyle entered the bathroom and picked up the clothes he had taken off. Coming back out, he began emptying his pockets and folding his clothes. Susie was too confused by what Kyle was saying to try to answer. Instead, she waited patiently for him to continue, her anger subsiding for a moment. We ended up in some club. It was already well after noon, so it wasn't very crowded there at all. She took me to a fenced-off area so we could talk privately, as she said, and ordered us a couple of drinks. Hearing her husband's casual words, Susie felt herself begin to shake. She felt the blood slowly drain from her face, leaving behind a tingling cold. At first we talked about normal topics, how things were going and all that. Then 3 more women appeared. I recognized one from a party we once attended. The other 2 were unfamiliar to me. But everyone said they knew you. While we were talking, it was nothing more than the usual crap again. We knocked back a few more glasses and then things got interesting. Somehow, I lost consciousness. Unable to contain herself, Susie squeaked in disbelief. What? Yeah, Kyle confirmed. I fainted. When I came to my senses, I was lying down. I felt cold. And do you know why I was cold? Because I was completely naked. Can you believe it? Kyle asked with a sad laugh. But everything became even more interesting. When I woke up, I found the bed shaking. As it turns out, it was Beth riding me. And she rode me like some kind of stallion. By the way, she was naked too. Listen, she reminded me of you 20 years ago when your breasts were pert and high. Your ass is tight and firm. Anyway, there she was, groaning half madly. Susie understood what Kyle meant. Beth was 28, and still had the firmness and springiness of youth. Yet, comparing her then and her now was offensive. This also brought Susie's ire again. Needless to say, but I will. I was completely confused by what was happening. I asked myself, how did I get there? How did Beth set me up so easily? So I asked. In fact, I was so angry at being used in this way, and without prior consent, that I roared. Nothing good came of this. Beth was so carried away that she didn't seem to hear. And if she did, she didn't seem to care. Having finished folding his clothes, Kyle turned to face the chest of drawers and began to sort through the things lying there. Susie sat mesmerized by her husband's story, so stunned that she could not yet speak. I tried to sit up, and then I noticed that someone was sitting on my legs. My arms were stretched out to the sides, my wrists were tightly squeezed by someone else's hands, and my palms were just as tightly gripped in something wet and soft. I didn't see who was sitting on my legs because Beth's heaving body was in the way. But from the sides I saw the same 2 new girls from the club holding my hands. Besides, they were both naked. My hands were between their clenched thighs, and my fingers were right in their private parts. Susie had heard enough. However, she was so furious, so angry, that all she could do was hiss, spitting out her bile. In any case, I decided that the girl from the party was holding my legs. Mind you, I still felt weak and dazed, so no matter how hard I struggled, I could not escape the girl's hands. Are you still listening to me, Sue? Rising to her feet, Susie said, addressing no one in particular. I'll kill her. Wait, honey, there's one more thing I need to tell you. Quickly turning to Kyle. Susie's sex story contempt Kyle. It's disgusting. Disgusting. How could you and her... I mean, she's my best friend. Was my best friend. Why did she do this to me? That's exactly what I'm getting at. Now can I continue? Okay, Kyle, but I don't want to hear the details. Not a single word about sex, Susie said coldly. Okay, honey. Well, after Beth got to the finish line, when she finished, she jumped off me. She moved to hold my legs, replacing the other girl, who immediately began to climb on top. Kyle, Susie warned, drawing out his name. Sighing, Kyle looked straight at his wife and said, Listen, Sue. I'm the victim here. I was kidnapped by 4 horny women who used me against my will. Why this happened will become clear in a moment. I really think you need to hear what I have to say. Okay, but don't talk about sex. So, this girl from the party, by the way, her name is, Kyle began. But Susie interrupted him. I don't care about her name. I don't want to hear anything at all. But since you seem so determined to tell me everything, I'm listening, but don't bring it up, Kyle. And I'm not sticking it out. But for it to make sense, everything must be told sequentially. Okay? Besides, it was you who wanted to talk. That's what I'm saying. Caught off guard by Kyle's raised voice, Susie simply shrugged. As I already said, this girl Shanna was at Beth's bachelorette party, just like the other 2 girls. So as Shanna continued to move on me, things got even more interesting. Observing his wife's reaction, Kyle continued. Beth began to explain something. The first thing she said was that she wanted to get even. Noticing that Sue was about to say something, he beat her to it by saying, Wait. Don't interrupt, Sue. Don't say a word until I'm done. If you leave this room before I'm done, I won't discuss this anymore. The look she gave him could have frozen hell, but she didn't say a word. Instead, she hissed with displeasure and began pacing around the room again. The second thing Beth said was that she didn't believe a man could be unconscious and still have an erection. Unconscious may be too strong, as she was referring to a drunken faint, which is actually half-conscious. See, apparently someone had sex with her fiancé while he was drunk and passed out. Are you still with me? A sickening feeling began to displace the anger Sue had been holding back. Her stomach churned and she felt suddenly nauseous. Sue looked down at her feet, quickly swallowing the sour bitterness that rose in her throat, burning it, while Kyle's words rang in her ears like crazy church bells. I was a guinea pig to see if a man could get an erection under the same conditions as Beth's fiancé Andy. Obviously, he wasn't lying, which put Beth in a sticky position because she didn't believe him. But now, you won't know until you try, so to speak. Thirdly, Beth explained why they chose me. Apparently, you completely let go of the brakes, even snorted some kind of rubbish and drank a lot. I can understand letting off some steam, but you went a little further. Isn't that right, Susan? When his wife refused to look up, preferring to remain silent, Kyle continued. They all saw you having sex with 2 strippers. And then you disappeared. When the girls noticed that you were gone, they got worried and went looking for you. They spotted your car across the street, parked at the same motel they were now taking me to. Can you imagine it? What a coincidence. So, after they had a nice talk with the receptionist, he gave them a key card, and they went to the room you rented. In fact, it was the same room they took me to. He must be one of the popular ones. In any case, thinking that you were sleeping there, they decided that they could join you, since they were also quite drunk. Only they weren't so drunk that they didn't understand what they were seeing. After pausing for a few seconds to wait for his wife's reaction, who only moaned softly, Kyle continued. They saw you and Andy having sex like 2 rabbits. Well, you were the only one actually having sex. But Andy wasn't completely unconscious, since they saw that he was moving a little too. I think even dead drunk people react and do it unconsciously. So, now you understand the reason for my abduction and subsequent use. Anyway, by the time all the girls had done their thing with me, I had sobered up, regained my strength, and was fully conscious that the job was already done. When the last girl got her way, Beth called Andy to apologize for not believing him. Unfortunately, she also explained why she now believes him. Needless to say, Andy was not happy. Not at all. He was so upset that he called off the wedding, breaking off the engagement over the phone. So, don't worry about Beth's wedding because now she won't. Looking at his wife, he saw how much she was suffering. He wasn't intentionally trying to hurt her, but he wasn't unhappy with her pain either. Okay, it's all over now, the final. Do you have anything to add to what Beth said? Shaking her head, Susie said quietly, No. Okay, then I'll go to bed. Damn tired. It was a long day and an even longer evening. In a barely audible whisper, Susie asked the question that filled her heart with fear. Will you divorce me? Kyle sat down on the bed and, yawning, said, Beth and the girls confirmed that you were high and drunk. So this time I'll leave it as is because as far as I know, you've never done anything like this before. However, Beth is not so forgiving. I doubt she'll call you anytime soon. As Kyle reached over to turn off the lamp on his nightstand, he heard Susie ask another question. In a quiet voice, his wife asked, Kyle, did you like it? Well, I mean, how were you able to hold out for so long without quickly reaching the finish line? Turning his head towards her, he chuckled slightly. Oh, this. Well, after the girls picked me up while I was unconscious, Beth used, what did she call it? Oh yeah, cock ring. Imagine with a cock ring. God, this thing actually works. As Kyle thought back on the last few hours, he remembered something else. Just so you know, the girls put condoms on me. Beth apologized, but said that since you and I were having sex, she didn't want them to get anything that you could give me. And I hope you didn't tell me anything, Sue. With these words, he turned off the light and made himself comfortable, already half asleep. Susie's husband said one more thing in a sleepy voice. By the way, Beth said we could get drunk again sometime. Good night, darling. Soon, the only sounds heard in the bedroom were breathing in a slow, even rhythm and uneven sobbing sobs.